The night sky above the lunar observatory was different that evening. Dr. Anna Martins noticed it first as she sat at her monitoring station. The stars seemed to pulse in an odd way, like a heartbeat that shouldn't exist. She rubbed her tired eyes, thinking it was just the result of staring at screens for too long. But when she looked again, the strange pulsing remained. "Hey, could you take a look at this?" She called to her assistant, who was organizing data files nearby. Something's not right with the stellar readings. The assistant walked over, coffee cup in hand, and leaned in to look at the screen. His eyes widened. The energy patterns coming from a particular section of space were unlike anything they had seen before. They didn't match any known natural phenomena. Anna's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, running analysis after analysis. Each result came back the same. These signals defied the known laws of physics. They weren't random. They had a pattern, a complexity that suggested intelligence. Within hours, she had alerted her superiors. Within days, observatories around the world confirmed her findings. Something vast and unknown was reaching out from the depths of space, and it had Earth in its sights. The first emergency meeting took place in a secured conference room at NASA headquarters. Anna sat at the long table, surrounded by the world's leading scientists and military officials. Captain Peter Wright, a military advisor with piercing blue eyes and a stern expression, stood at the front of the room. "These signals," he said, pointing to the graphs projected on the wall, "they're getting stronger, and they're aimed directly at us. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we respond." Anna cleared her throat. "The patterns are complex, but they're not random. There's intelligence behind them, but—" She paused, searching for the right words. "It's not like anything we've ever seen. The mathematics involved, they shouldn't be possible according to our understanding of physics." The room fell silent as she pulled up new data on the screen. "Look at this," she continued. "The signals aren't just carrying information. They're changing the fabric of space-time around them. It's as if reality itself bends where these messages pass through." Dr. John Russell, an expert in signal analysis, spoke up from the other end of the table. "We've tried every known decryption method. The closest we've come to understanding them is this." He pressed a button on his laptop, and a sound filled the room. It wasn't music, wasn't speech, wasn't anything that human ears were meant to hear. It made people uncomfortable, made their skin crawl. Some covered their ears, though the volume wasn't loud. It just felt wrong, like the audio equivalent of an optical illusion. "Turn it off," Captain Wright ordered, and blessed silence returned to the room. What was that? That was just 1 second of the signal, slowed down and converted to sound, John explained. "There's something about it that our brains can't quite process. It's like trying to visualize a fourth-dimensional object. We can understand parts of it, but the whole thing is beyond our comprehension." As the meeting continued, reports started coming in from around the world. People were seeing things they couldn't explain. In small towns and big cities, witnesses described impossible shapes in the sky. Children woke from nightmares talking about voices that spoke in colors. Animals began acting strangely, with whole flocks of birds flying in geometric patterns that defied natural behavior. Anna spent countless hours in her lab, trying to make sense of it all. The signals were changing, evolving. They seemed to be responding to Earth's own radio transmissions, learning, adapting. It was like having a conversation with something so advanced that even its simplest communications were beyond human understanding. One night, as she worked late at the observatory, she noticed something new. The signals had changed again, but this time they were forming patterns she could almost understand. Almost, but not quite, like a word on the tip of her tongue, or a shape seen from the corner of her eye that vanished when she tried to look at it directly. She called Captain Wright immediately. "I think they're trying to communicate with us directly now," she said, her voice tense with excitement and fear. "They're simplifying their messages, adapting them for our level of comprehension." "Can you decode it?" he asked. "I'm trying," but she stared at her screen, where complex patterns shifted and changed. It's like they're speaking a language that exists in more dimensions than we can perceive. We're only seeing the shadow of their true communication. The breakthrough came 3 days later. Anna and her team had been working nonstop, fueled by coffee and the urgent need to understand. They finally managed to translate a small portion of the signal into something they could comprehend. The message was simple, but terrifying. You are seen. More followed. You are known. And finally, you are chosen. The implications were clear. Earth hadn't randomly picked up alien communications. Something out there had been watching humanity, studying them, and now had decided to make contact. But why? The answer came in the form of worldwide phenomena that no one could explain or deny. People began seeing shapes that shouldn't exist, geometric patterns that hurt to look at. The laws of physics started behaving strangely in small ways, objects falling up instead of down, shadows moving against their light sources, reflections that showed things that weren't there. Captain Wright called another emergency meeting. This time, the room was fuller, tenser. Military leaders from around the world joined via secure video links. The situation had escalated beyond scientific curiosity into potential global security threat. Whatever these entities are, Anna explained to the gathered officials, they're not just sending us messages anymore. They're affecting our reality. The barriers between their dimension and ours are getting thinner. Can we stop it? Someone asked. Anna looked at her latest readings, at the patterns that grew more complex and more alien by the hour. I don't know, she admitted, but I think they want us to see them, to understand them. And I'm not sure our minds are ready for what they truly are. As if to prove her point, at that exact moment, every screen in the room began showing impossible images, fractals that extended inward forever, shapes that changed when you weren't looking directly at them, colors that had no names in any human language. The message was clear. Humanity's comfortable understanding of reality was about to change forever. Something vast and incomprehensible had turned its attention to Earth, and there would be no hiding from its gaze. As Anna stared at the shifting patterns on her screen, she felt a chill run down her spine. She knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning. Humanity was about to face something beyond their wildest imaginations, and their determination would be tested in ways no one could predict. The cosmic horror had made first contact, and Earth would never be the same again. Dr. John Russell hadn't slept properly in days. The dark circles under his eyes told the story of countless hours spent in the research lab, trying to decode the alien signals. Coffee cups littered his desk, and his computer screen flickered with endless streams of data that shouldn't exist. I think I'm getting somewhere, he said to Lisa Bennett, the quantum physicist who had joined his team last week. Look at this pattern here. Lisa leaned forward, her blonde hair falling across her face as she studied the screen. The numbers and symbols danced across the display, forming patterns that seemed to shift even as she watched them. That's impossible, she whispered. These equations suggest they exist in at least 7 dimensions. 8, actually, John corrected her, running his hand through his messy brown hair. And that's just what we can measure. There could be more. Their research facility, hidden away in a remote mountain location, had become the central hub for studying the alien signals. The government had gathered the brightest minds they could find, hoping to understand what humanity was facing before it was too late. The first breakthrough came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. John had been dozing at his desk when his computer started beeping urgently. The noise woke him, and he stared at his screen in disbelief. Everyone, he shouted, his voice echoing through the facility's halls. I need everyone in the main lab now. Scientists rushed in, many still in their pajamas. Lisa arrived first, followed by the others. They gathered around John's workstation as he pointed to his screen with a shaking hand. I've decoded part of their language, he explained. It's not just communication. It's a form of reality manipulation. Every signal they send literally changes the physics of the space it passes through. He pulled up a new window, showing a visualization of the data. But here's the terrifying part. They're not just sending messages. They're feeding on something. These entities, they consume fear. Not just any fear, the fear of intelligent beings. And they've been doing it for millions of years. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Lisa was the first to speak up. Are you saying they farm civilizations for their fear? John nodded slowly. Like cattle. They find intelligent species, reveal themselves gradually, feed on the fear their presence causes, and then. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood. But why show themselves at all? Someone asked from the back of the room. Why not just stay hidden and scary? Because fear of the unknown isn't enough for them, Lisa answered, her eyes wide as she connected the dots. They need their victims to comprehend them, at least partially. The more we understand what they are, the more terrifying they become, and the more they can feed. The next few days were a blur of activity. As the team worked to understand more about the entities, strange things began happening in the facility. People reported seeing impossible shapes in the shadows, hearing whispers in languages that couldn't exist. 2 researchers had to be sent home after they started writing complex mathematical equations on the walls in their sleep. The first major casualty came a week later. Dr. Paul Martinez, a brilliant mathematician, was found in his office one morning. He was alive, but his mind was gone. His computer contained notes about a breakthrough he'd had. He'd managed to fully comprehend one small aspect of the entity's true nature. The human mind wasn't meant to contain such knowledge. Now he spent his days in a care facility, drawing perfect fractals and mumbling about angles that didn't exist. John called an emergency meeting with the military liaison team. Captain Wright was there, along with representatives from several other countries. We've learned more, John explained, his voice tired but determined. These beings, they're ancient. They were old when the first fish crawled onto land on Earth. They fed on countless civilizations across the galaxy. He showed them images, graphs, data readouts. Each civilization they encountered followed the same pattern. First contact, growing understanding, mounting fear, and then. He paused, searching for the right words. The best translation we have for what happens next is harvest. How long do we have? Captain Wright asked, his face grim. Lisa stepped forward with a tablet in her hands. Based on the patterns we decoded, they usually spend about 6 months revealing themselves to a species before the harvest begins. We've been in contact for 2 months now. What about defense? Someone asked. There must be a way to fight them. John shook his head. How do you fight something that exists in more dimensions than we can perceive? It's like a 2-dimensional being trying to fight a human. We can't even properly see them, let alone fight them. But then Lisa spoke up, her voice excited despite the dark circles under her eyes. Maybe we can't fight them conventionally, but I've noticed something interesting. These entities, they expect fear. All their patterns, their behaviors, they're based on countless experiences with other civilizations. But humans, she pulled up a new set of data on the main screen. Humans aren't reacting quite like they expected. The display showed comparison charts between predicted fear responses and actual human reactions. While there was plenty of fear, there was something else too. Curiosity, determination, anger. Look at this, she continued. When the entities increase their fear stimulus, most species show exponential increases in fear response. Humans show some increase, yes, but they also show increased resistance. Some even show increased aggression toward the unknown. We're not just prey animals freezing in fear, we're pushing back. Captain Wright leaned forward, suddenly interested. Are you saying we might have a chance? I'm saying we might be the first species they've encountered that doesn't just accept being prey, Lisa replied. Every time they reveal more of themselves, expecting us to break under the weight of cosmic horror, we adapt. We study them. We try to understand them. And I don't think they know how to handle that. The meeting continued late into the night as they discussed possibilities and plans. But even as they talked, the entities were escalating their efforts. Outside the facility, the sky had taken on colors that human eyes shouldn't be able to see. Reality itself seemed to be getting thinner, more malleable. John stayed late in his lab that night, reviewing the latest data. As he studied the patterns of the entities' communications, he noticed something new. A slight hesitation in their signals, a fraction of a second delay in their responses to human reactions. It was tiny, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. They're uncertain, he realized, speaking aloud to his empty lab. For the first time, in maybe millions of years, they're not sure what's going to happen next. He quickly sent messages to Lisa and Captain Wright about his discovery. As he waited for their responses, he looked out his window at the strange sky above. The entities had chosen humanity as their next harvest, but they might have gotten more than they bargained for. The price of knowledge was high, but humanity was proving willing to pay it, and perhaps even turn it back on their would-be harvesters. The cosmic horror had revealed itself, expecting to find easily terrorized prey. Instead, they'd found humans, stubborn, curious, and determined to understand even that which should break their minds. The real question was, what would happen when the harvesters The attack began at dawn. All across the globe, people woke to find their minds under siege. Strange visions filled their thoughts, and impossible geometries twisted through their dreams. The cosmic entities had started their psychological assault on humanity. Dr. Christopher Hayes stood at his laboratory window, watching the sky turn colors that shouldn't exist. His team at the Defense Research Center had been preparing for this moment, but the reality was far worse than they had imagined. Status report. He called out to his team, trying to keep his voice steady despite the pressure building in his head. Susan Morgan, the military engineer who had been working with him for the past month, looked up from her bank of computers. Her dark skin was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp and focused. The attacks are worldwide, but they're not as effective as the entities expected. People are adapting. Chris walked over to her station, fighting against the vertigo that came from looking at the data streams on her screens. The numbers told an interesting story. While many people were experiencing fear and mental distress, the levels were far below what the entities had predicted. "Get me Captain Wright," Chris said, reaching for his phone. Before he could dial, the captain burst through the laboratory doors. "Please tell me you have something," Peter Wright said, his uniform wrinkled from too many hours on duty. "We've got mass hallucinations in every major city, but people aren't panicking. They're angry." Chris smiled for the first time in days. That's exactly what we needed to hear. He led them to the center of the lab, where a large device hummed with strange energy. "We've been studying how the entities affect our reality. They use fear as a wedge, pushing into our dimension through the cracks in our consciousness. But human minds are surprisingly resilient." Susan joined them, carrying a tablet filled with new data. "The entities expect us to break under the weight of their reality. Instead, we're beginning to understand it. Not completely. That would drive us mad. But enough to fight back." She pulled up a global map showing hot spots of entity activity. "Look at this. Wherever their influence is strongest, we're seeing something unprecedented. People are organizing. They're sharing their experiences, comparing notes. Instead of hiding from the horror, they're documenting it." "But how does that help us?" Wright asked, rubbing his temples against the constant psychic pressure. Chris walked over to the humming device. "Because understanding is a two-way street. Every time they reach into our reality, they leave traces we can study. And we've learned something fascinating. They're not as incomprehensible as they want us to think." He activated the device, and a field of energy spread through the room. Immediately, the psychic pressure lessened. The impossible colors in the sky outside seemed to fade slightly. "What is that?" Wright asked, standing straighter as the mental burden lifted. "We call it a reality anchor," Susan explained. "It doesn't block them completely, but it reinforces our version of physics within its field. More importantly, it shows us something the entities didn't want us to know. They have rules they have to follow too. The discovery sparked a global revolution in defense strategy. Within days, reality anchors were being manufactured and distributed to major population centers. People began fighting back against the mental assault, using their understanding of the entities' patterns to resist their influence. But the entities didn't take this resistance lightly. Their attacks intensified, becoming more focused and personal. They began targeting key researchers and military personnel, trying to break the minds of those leading the resistance. Chris worked through endless days and nights, improving the reality anchors and studying the entities' reactions. Each time humanity developed a new defense, the cosmic horrors adjusted their attack. It became a race of adaptation and counter-adaptation. One morning, as Chris reviewed the latest data, he noticed something odd. "Susan," he called out, "look at this pattern." She hurried over, her eyes widening as she saw what he'd found. "That's not possible." There, hesitating. The data showed clear delays in the entity's responses to human defiance. Where they had once acted with absolute certainty, now they showed signs of confusion, and even what appeared to be concern. They've never encountered this before, Chris realized. Every other species they've harvested reacted with pure fear. But humans, we're curious. We're angry. We're determined to understand. And that's something they don't know how to handle. The breakthrough came during what later became known as the First Stand. A small town in the Midwest had been chosen as a target for an intensified entity attack. But instead of succumbing to fear, the townspeople gathered in the center of their reality anchors field. They faced the impossible horrors together, documenting everything they saw, sharing their experiences, and most importantly, refusing to break. The entity's attack faltered. For the first time in their ancient history, their prey was staring back at them, not with mindless terror, but with determined curiosity. Chris and Susan were monitoring the situation from their lab when they detected something unprecedented: a retreat. The entities actually pulled back from the town, their influence fading like smoke in the wind. "Get me everything you can from that town," Chris ordered, his tired face lit with excitement. Whatever they did, however they resisted, that's our key. The data painted a clear picture. The townspeople's collective will, their refusal to submit to fear, had actually pushed back against the entity's influence. It wasn't just about understanding the cosmic horrors anymore. Humanity had found a way to fight them. Susan worked frantically to analyze the event. "It's like a feedback loop," she explained to Captain Wright later that day. "When we face them with determination instead of fear, it creates a kind of mental barrier. They can't feed on what we're not giving them." The discovery led to a new strategy. Reality anchors were modified to include gathering spaces where people could face the entities together. The more people gathered, the stronger the resistance became. Humanity's collective will was becoming a weapon against the cosmic horror. But even as they celebrated this victory, Chris noticed something troubling in the latest readings. The entities weren't just retreating. They were changing their tactics. New patterns were emerging in their attacks, more subtle and complex than before. "They're learning," he told Susan late one night as they reviewed the data, "just like we're learning about them. They're learning about us. This isn't over, it's just changing." Susan nodded, her face determined in the glow of the computer screens. "Then we'll keep changing too. They thought we'd be easy prey, that we'd break under the weight of their reality. Instead, we're making them face something they've never encountered before, a species that refuses to be harvested." Outside their lab, the sky still rippled with impossible colors, and people still saw things that shouldn't exist. But now there was a difference. Humanity wasn't cowering from these horrors anymore. They were standing together, facing the infinite with determination rather than fear. The cosmic entities had started their harvest expecting to feed on humanity's terror. Instead, they found themselves facing a species that turned their greatest weapon: understanding. against them. The question was no longer whether humanity would survive, but what would happen when the harvesters realized their prey had become the hunter. Amanda Foster never expected to find herself studying the psychology of cosmic horrors. As a behavioral psychologist, she had spent years analyzing human responses to fear. Now she found herself analyzing the behavior of entities that shouldn't even exist. She sat in her office at the Global Defense Center, surrounded by screens showing data from around the world. Each display tracked different aspects of the entity's attacks and humanity's responses. But it was the pattern she had noticed in the entity's behavior that kept drawing her attention. "They're frustrated," she said to herself, making another note in her already full notebook. "They don't understand why we're not breaking." The door opened, and Susan Morgan walked in, carrying fresh coffee. The military engineer had been working closely with Amanda since they discovered that the entity's attacks followed predictable patterns. "You look like you found something," Susan said, placing a cup on Amanda's desk. Amanda nodded, pushing her red hair back from her face. "Look at this," she said, pulling up a new set of data. "The entities are changing their attack patterns, but not in the way we expected. They're not just escalating. They're experimenting. They're trying to understand us." The screen showed waves of psychic attacks across different regions. In some areas, the entities used subtle fears, creeping horrors that built slowly. In others, they attempted overwhelming force. But nowhere were they getting the results they expected. "They've harvested thousands of civilizations," Amanda continued, "but they've never encountered one that responds like humans do. We're not just resistant. We're adaptable in ways they can't predict." Susan leaned in to study the data. "Is that why they're focusing so much attention on population centers? They're trying to understand our social behavior." "Exactly." Amanda stood up and walked to a large wall screen showing a global map. "But here's the fascinating part. They don't understand how human connections work. Every other species they'd harvested faced them as individuals. Humans faced them as groups, as communities, as a united species." Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent call. Captain Wright's face appeared on the main screen, looking more concerned than usual. "We've got a situation," he said without preamble. "The entities are gathering for something big. We need your analysis. Now." Amanda and Susan rushed to the command center, where scientists and military personnel were gathered around a central display. The image showed massive disturbances in reality across multiple continents. "They're trying a coordinated attack," Chris Hayes explained as they entered. His reality anchors had been crucial in humanity's defense, but even he looked worried now. "They're hitting everything at once." The attack began moments later. All around the world, reality began to twist and bend. The entities pushed harder than ever before, trying to break through humanity's mental defenses with sheer force. But something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking under the assault, people gathered together. In cities, towns, and villages, they came to the reality anchor stations. They shared their experiences, supported each other, and most importantly, they fought back. Amanda watched the data streams with growing excitement. "This is it," she exclaimed. "This is what makes us different. Look at the fear levels. They're high, yes, but look at the other emotions." The screen showed a complex mix of human responses. Fear was present, but it was accompanied by determination, anger, curiosity, and most surprisingly, hope. Every other species they've harvested experienced pure terror, Amanda explained to the room. "But humans, we feel fear differently. We can be afraid and angry at the same time. We can be terrified but still curious. We can be horrified but still determined to fight back." As they watched, the entity's attack began to falter. The coordinated assault that should have broken humanity's will instead united people like never before. In every country, humans stood together against the cosmic horror. "They're experiencing uncertainty," Amanda said, studying the new readings. "Maybe for the first time in their existence, they've never failed to harvest a species before, and they don't know how to handle failure. The entity's confusion was evident in their increasingly erratic attacks. They tried changing tactics rapidly, switching between different forms of horror, but nothing worked as it should. Humanity's response remained unpredictable, adaptable, and most importantly, unified. Late that night, as the global attack finally subsided, Amanda made a breakthrough in her analysis. She called an emergency meeting with the defense team. "I figured out why they can't break us," she announced to the tired but attentive group. "They feed on fear, yes, but specifically on the fear of the unknown and incomprehensible. They expect species to break when faced with something they can't understand. But humans, we don't just fear the unknown. We study it. We face it. We try to understand it." She pulled up new data on the main screen. "Look at these patterns. Every time they reveal more of their true nature, expecting us to break under the cosmic horror, we instead try to learn from it. We're turning their greatest weapon, understanding, into our shield." Chris nodded slowly. "That's why the reality anchors work so well. They're not just blocking the entity's influence, they're helping us understand and adapt to it." "Exactly," Amanda continued. "And here's the really interesting part. The entities are starting to fear us." The room fell silent at this revelation. Susan was the first to speak up. "How can you tell?" Amanda highlighted several patterns in the data. "Their attacks are becoming more cautious. They're holding back, testing, trying to understand us before committing fully. That's not the behavior of an apex predator. That's the behavior of something that's encountered an unexpected threat." Captain Wright leaned forward. "Are you saying we can actually win this?" "I'm saying we're already winning," Amanda replied. "Every time they attack and fail, every time we understand a little more about them, every time we stand together instead of breaking apart in fear, we're changing the rules of their game." As if to confirm her analysis, new readings began coming in from around the world. The entities were pulling back, retreating from their failed assault. But they weren't giving up. They were regrouping, rethinking their approach. "They'll be back," Chris said, studying the readings. "But next time, we'll be even better prepared." Amanda nodded, already making notes for her next analysis. "They thought they were studying us, deciding if we were ready for harvest. Instead, we've been studying them, learning their patterns, understanding their nature. And that's the one thing they never expected. A prey species that turns the hunter's own methods against them." Outside the command center, the sky was beginning to clear. The impossible colors and mind-bending geometries were fading. But everyone knew this was just a temporary reprieve. The cosmic horrors would return, with new tactics and new terrors. But humanity would be ready. They had faced the incomprehensible and refused to break. They had stared into the infinite darkness and found not just fear, but determination, curiosity, and unity. The entities had chosen humanity as their next harvest, expecting to find easy prey. Instead, they found themselves facing a species that refused to be harvested, a species that turned understanding into a weapon and unity into a shield. The human variable had changed everything, and the cosmic horrors were about to learn just how dangerous their chosen prey could be. Dr. Daniel Cooper had been staring at the same equation for 3 hours when he saw it. The answer had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. His hand shook as he reached for his phone to call the defense team. "They're not as strong as we thought," he said as soon as Captain Wright answered. "They have a weakness, and we've been using it without even knowing it." Within an hour, the main conference room at the Global Defense Center was full. Amanda Foster sat next to Susan Morgan, both looking expectantly at Daniel as he stood at the front of the room. His usually neat appearance was disheveled from days of non-stop work, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "We've been thinking about this all wrong," he began, pulling up complex equations on the main screen. "We thought they were beings of pure cosmic horror, existing in higher dimensions. But they're not. They're parasites." He simplified the display, showing a basic diagram. "They feed on fear because they have to. It's not just their preference. It's their survival mechanism, and that's their weakness. How does that help us? Captain Wright asked, leaning forward in his chair. Daniel smiled. Because parasites can starve. And more importantly, they can feel fear themselves when their food source is threatened. The room burst into discussion, but Daniel held up his hand for silence. Look at these readings from our last defense. He showed new data, highlighting specific patterns. Every time we resist them successfully, there's a ripple effect in their own reality. We're not just blocking them, we're pushing back into their dimension. Michelle Patterson, a weapons engineer who had been working on offensive capabilities, stood up from her seat. Are you saying we can hurt them? Better than that, Daniel replied. We can make them afraid. The revelation changed everything. Michelle immediately began adapting the reality anchors into something new, weapons that could project human consciousness into the entity's dimension. The technology was based on the same principles that allowed the entities to reach into our reality, but reversed. Think of it like turning a telescope around, Michelle explained to the team as they built the first prototype. Instead of them looking into our world, we're looking into theirs. And we're not just looking, we're reaching. The first test took place in a heavily shielded facility. Michelle had built what she called a consciousness projector, a device that could focus the mental energy of multiple humans into a concentrated beam. Remember, she warned the volunteers, this isn't about fear. It's about determination, about the human will to survive and understand. That's what hurts them the most. The test exceeded all expectations. When the device activated, they could actually see the entity's reaction. The air rippled with impossible colors as the cosmic horrors recoiled from the human consciousness reaching into their realm. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young researcher noticed that the entities seemed to experience something like pain when exposed to human emotions they couldn't understand. Things like hope, curiosity, and determination in the face of the unknown. It's like an immune response, Amanda explained during the follow-up briefing. They're allergic to the very things that make us human. The defense team worked around the clock to develop this new weapon. All around the world, they built consciousness projectors, each one powered by the collective will of human volunteers. But they needed something bigger for their first real offensive. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The entities, perhaps sensing the growing threat, launched another massive attack. But this time, humanity was ready. As the cosmic horrors reached into our reality, trying to feed on fear, they found something very different waiting for them. In every major city, consciousness projectors powered up. Thousands of humans stood together, focusing not on their fear, but on their determination to survive, to understand, to fight back. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The entity's attack faltered, then broke entirely. For the first time in their ancient history, the cosmic horrors experienced true fear, the fear of prey facing a stronger predator. Look at these readings, Michelle shouted, pointing to her monitors. The data showed massive disruptions in the entity's dimensional space. We're not just pushing them back, we're hurting them. Daniel watched the numbers with growing excitement. They never imagined this could happen. They'd spent millions of years feeding on fear, never understanding that fear could work both ways. The battle raged for hours. All across the globe, humans stood united, their collective will focused through the projectors. The entities tried to adapt, to change their tactics, but every attempt to feed on fear only exposed them to more human determination. In the command center, Amanda monitored the entities' reactions. They're experiencing chaos, she reported. Their whole society was built on being the ultimate predator. Now they're facing the possibility that they might become prey themselves. The turning point came when the entities tried one last, desperate attack. They attempted to overwhelm humanity's defenses with pure cosmic horror, revealing more of their true nature than ever before. But instead of breaking under this assault, humans did something unprecedented. They tried to understand it. Don't look away. Michelle called to the volunteers at her projector station. Whatever you see, whatever you feel, try to understand it. That's what they fear most. Our ability to face the incomprehensible and learn from it. The entity's attack collapsed completely. The impossible colors in the sky began to fade. The reality-bending effects weakened, and for the first time since first contact, the world began to feel normal again. But victory brought new questions. In the aftermath of the battle, as the defense team studied the data, they realized they had changed more than just the balance of power. "We've evolved," Daniel explained to Captain Wright, showing him the latest readings. "Every time we faced them, every time we tried to understand them, we grew stronger. Our minds adapted to comprehend things we never should have been able to understand." "Is that dangerous?" Wright asked, concerned. Daniel shook his head. "I don't think so. We're not breaking under the weight of cosmic knowledge. We're learning to carry it. And that's what terrifies them most." The entities retreated to their own dimension, but everyone knew this wasn't the end. They would return, perhaps with new tactics, new horrors. But humanity would be ready. "We're not just defending anymore," Michelle said during the final briefing of the day. "We've learned how to fight back. The next time they come, they won't be facing helpless prey. They'll be facing a species that knows how to make cosmic horrors feel fear." As the sun set on this first major victory, the defense team gathered to plan their next steps. They had turned the tide of battle, but the war was far from over. Yet there was a new feeling in the air. Not just determination or defiance, but something the entities would never understand: hope. The cosmic horrors had chosen humanity as their next harvest, expecting easy prey. Instead, they found a species that could turn fear itself into a weapon. The hunters had become the hunted, and the universe would never be the same. The stars looked different now. Dr. Anna Martinez stood at her old spot in the lunar observatory, remembering the night she first noticed the strange pulses in the sky. So much had changed since then. Humanity had faced cosmic horror and emerged stronger. Now, they weren't just watching the stars, they were guarding them. "We've got movement in Sector 7, called out one of her assistants. The new detection systems, built with their understanding of higher dimensions, could track the entity's movements across space. Anna checked the readings herself. "They're retreating further," she confirmed, "moving away from all known civilizations." The entity's withdrawal had started 3 weeks ago, after humanity's successful counterattack. At first, everyone expected another trick, another form of attack. But as days passed, it became clear the cosmic horrors were genuinely afraid. Down on Earth, in the Global Defense Center, Dr. Kevin Sanders was reviewing data from the consciousness projectors when his screen suddenly lit up with new signals. These weren't from the entities. They were different, structured in ways they'd never seen before. "Captain Wright," he called out, "I think we're picking up something new." Peter Wright hurried over, followed by Amanda Foster and Michelle Patterson. They gathered around Kevin's station as he decoded the incoming signals. "It's a message," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "From another alien civilization, and it's in a format we can understand." The message was simple but clear. "You have done the impossible. We wish to speak." Within hours, more messages arrived from different parts of space. Other alien civilizations, previously hidden, were reaching out to humanity. They had been watching, waiting, seeing if humans would survive the harvest. "How many are there?" Captain Wright asked during the emergency briefing. Kevin pulled up a galactic map showing dozens of points of light. At least 30 different civilizations so far. Some of them have been hiding from the entities for thousands of years. Others are survivors of partial harvests who managed to hide their remaining populations. Amanda studied the messages with growing excitement. They're not just congratulating us. They're asking for help. They want to learn how we fought back. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as humanity established communication with their cosmic neighbors. Each civilization had its own story of horror and hiding, of watching helplessly as the entities fed on their fear. None of them had ever imagined fighting back was possible. Dr. Daniel Cooper led the team that began sharing humanity's discoveries. The key was never about technology, he explained during a global broadcast. It was about understanding. We faced the incomprehensible and refused to look away. We turned understanding into a weapon. But with this new role came new responsibilities. The other civilizations weren't just asking for help. They were warning about other threats in the galaxy. Humanity wasn't the first species to evolve beyond being prey, but they were the first to do it so quickly and so completely. We need to be ready, Michelle told the Defense Council. The entities aren't the only cosmic horrors out there, but now we know how to fight them. She had been working on improving the consciousness projectors, making them more powerful and easier to use. The technology was already being shared with other civilizations, teaching them how to defend themselves. The first test of humanity's new role came sooner than expected. One of the friendly alien civilizations detected entity activity near their homeworld. They were afraid the cosmic horrors were preparing for another harvest. We can help them, Anna said during the emergency meeting. We know how to fight these things now. We can teach others to do the same. The response was immediate. Earth sent ships carrying consciousness projectors and trained operators to help defend their new allies. But when they arrived, something unexpected happened. The entities fled immediately, not even attempting to attack. They recognize our ships, Kevin realized, studying the sensor data. They're running away from us. The hunters have become the hunted. The news spread quickly through the galaxy. Humanity, the species that had not only survived the harvest, but driven the harvesters away, was now protecting others. The entity's reign of terror was ending, not with a massive battle, but with their quiet retreat into the darkest corners of space. Back on Earth, Anna and her team made another fascinating discovery. The human mind was continuing to evolve, adapting to perceive and understand things that should have been impossible for three-dimensional beings to comprehend. We're not breaking under the weight of cosmic knowledge anymore, she explained to a group of scientists. We're growing stronger, learning to see the universe as it really is. And we're teaching others to do the same. The transformation of humanity from prey to protector happened faster than anyone expected. Ships equipped with consciousness projectors patrolled the spaceways, ensuring the entities couldn't return to their hunting grounds. Other civilizations began emerging from hiding, sharing their knowledge and technology. It's ironic, Amanda said one evening as she watched the sunset with her team. The entities tried to feed on our fear of the unknown. Instead, they taught us how to face our fears and grow stronger from them. They wanted to harvest us, but they ended up planting the seeds of their own defeat. The sky above was clear now, free from impossible colors and reality-bending effects. But humanity had learned to see beyond the visible spectrum, to understand things that their ancestors would have found incomprehensible. They had faced cosmic horror and emerged not just surviving, but transformed. Dr. Kevin Sanders, now heading the Interstellar Defense Initiative, summed it up best in his address to the first gathering of allied species. We were chosen as prey, but we became protectors. We faced the darkness not just with courage, but with curiosity and determination. The entities thought they were teaching us to fear the unknown. Instead, they taught us how to make the unknown known, how to turn understanding into strength. The cosmic horrors had retreated to the edges of known space, but they left behind a changed galaxy. Species that had hidden in fear for millennia now reached for the stars again. The age of the harvest was over. In its place, a new age of understanding and cooperation had begun. As Anna looked out at the stars from her observatory one last time before heading to her new post on an interstellar defense station, she smiled at the memory of that first strange pulse in the night sky. The entities had chosen Earth as their next feeding ground, expecting to find simple prey. Instead, they found humanity, stubborn, curious, determined humanity, who faced their greatest fears and turned them into their greatest strength. The cosmic horrors had wanted to feed on humanity's fear of the unknown, But they never understood the most fundamental truth about humans. Give them enough time, and they can learn to understand anything. And once understood, even the darkest cosmic horror could become just another challenge to overcome. The harvest had failed, and in its failure, a new chapter in the galaxy's history had begun. Humanity had become the species that fears no gods, the ones who stare into the abyss until the abyss itself looks away. They had become the terror of the known, the guardians against cosmic horror, and the teachers of a truth the entities never grasped. That understanding is the greatest weapon of all.